for joining us today at this very important moment. I want to thank all the allies who have come together today, in particular my colleague, Senator Maisie Hirono. We are going to be joined by Senator Patty Murray, Chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, Senator Richard Blumenthal, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, with whom I am proud to partner on this important legislation. I also want to acknowledge Senator Tammy Duckworth, who couldn't join us today, but who is a lead partner with us on this bill. The disastrous and deeply partisan set of Supreme Court decisions this term made clear that the fundamental rights of the American people are at risk. Last month, the extremist court took away the right to abortion, a right on which millions of Americans have relied for almost 50 years. But the generational damage to health and safety and freedom did not end with that stolen right. It was just a preview of coming atrocities from this Supreme Court. In his concurring opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson, Women's Health Organization, Justice Clarence Thomas outlined a long-held Republican belief that Americans had too many privacy rights under the Constitution, that the Supreme Court had erred in recognizing those rights, and that the court should take them away, just as it did with the right to abortion. This bears repeating. A sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court is arguing that Americans have too many rights. Justice Thomas urged the court to correct the error it committed when it recognized the right to same-sex marriage in 2015. It told the court to fix the error it made when it recognized the right of Americans to engage in private, consensual sexual activity in 2003. And he said the court got it wrong when it recognized the right of Americans to use contraception in 1965. But it is Justice Thomas and far-right extremists on the court who are wrong. These are all fundamental rights, all based on the right to privacy, and they should remain the law of the land. Justice Thomas's concurring opinion is like a movie trailer for an upcoming horror film that Americans are going to be forced to watch, written, produced, and directed by a captured, illegitimate Supreme Court. The right to contraception is central to an individual's health, to their well-being, to their life, liberty, equality, and economic and social freedom. It is a right grounded in the need and ability to make decisions about one's own body, one's own family, and one's own future. It is a right supported by both Democrats and Republicans. In a poll that came out yesterday, 75% of all Americans said Congress should protect birth control access, including 87% of Democrats and 62% of Republicans. And it is a right that we must make the law of the land so that extremist justices cannot take it away in order to advance a blatantly political agenda. We need to codify these fundamental rights now. That's why I'm standing here with my colleagues to announce that Democrats will attempt to pass on the Right to Contraception Act tomorrow. There is no time to waste. The Right to Contraception Act would codify Supreme Court's decision in the Griswold ruling that recognizes the right to obtain and use contraception. The bill would enshrine that right in federal law, guaranteeing a health care provider's right to prescribe these products and services and information related to them. In short, the Right to Contraception Act would safeguard contraception access and use even if the Griswold ruling were overturned. Several states have already restricted access to contraception by cutting off public funding for it, by defining abortion to include contraception, and by allowing healthcare providers to refuse to provide services related to contraception based on their own personal beliefs. Attacks on healthcare, especially reproductive health, fall hardest on historically marginalized communities, including Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, poor people, those living in rural and underserved areas, and immigrants. Last week, I proudly watched the House of Representatives pass its version of the Right to Contraception Act by a vote of 220 to 195. And I want to thank all of our partners in the House who led the charge there. I urge my colleagues to co-sponsor and support the Right to Contraception Act. We must make the right to safe and secure reproductive health and freedom the law of the land. And to my anti-choice Republican colleagues, I say this: if you would deprive an American of choosing whether or not to end their pregnancy, how could you also deprive them of the tools to prevent a pregnancy in the first place? Here is the unspoken answer. They want to exert control over the bodies of others, especially the bodies of women. If you don't agree with that, then join me in supporting the Right to Contraception Act with all of my colleagues. We must protect that right. And now I would like to introduce my colleague and partner and great leader on this issue, Senator Maisie Hirono from the state of Hawaii.
Thank you all. Overturning Roe has wreaked havoc across the country, and radical Republicans are just getting started. I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues. For this far-right Supreme Court and MAGA Republicans, controlling women's bodies doesn't just stop at forcing women to give birth. They actually want to ban contraception. In his concurring opinion to overturn Roe, Justice Thomas wrote that the Supreme Court should next reconsider the rulings that protect access to contraception, same-sex relationships, and marriage equality. This is called signaling. When a far-right Supreme Court justice, now in the majority, signals, we have to pay attention. Justice Alito always said that the original Roe decision was wrongly decided back when it was decided. So at the same time, radical Republicans in state legislatures across the country are gearing up. In Ohio, House Republicans introduced a bill that would effectively ban abortions from the moment of conception, and potentially other forms of birth control such as IUDs. Other Republicans have refused to rule out banning certain forms of contraception. Everyone in this country needs to realize that nothing is off the table. And that's why we must now protect the right to contraception. Our bill, the Right to Contraception Act, would create a statutory right for individuals to access contraception. This would be a national bill. This bill also protects the right of healthcare providers to provide contraceptives to their patients. It also empowers individuals by extending a private right of action against any state or government official that hinders these rights. We need to put every single Republican on the record on whether they support the right to contraception and indeed the right to bodily autonomy. You know what the bottom line is? Who should have control over our bodies? Us or a bunch of politicians? And we say it should be us. And on the way over here, I ran into a group of young people. They're in high school and in college. They were putting together a quilt that says support ERA, because their argument is that if we were to ratify the ERA, then all these protections that Clarence Thomas has signaled should be subject to a revisit by the Supreme Court would all be protected. These young people get it. They are in the fight now because they know that their rights are being taken away. It gives me hope that those of us, when I was in college, abortion was not legal. And then it's been legal for 50 years, and to think that a right that we thought we had and we fought for is being taken away after 50 years, and therefore all these young people have fewer rights than we had, it is amazing to me. And as one of my friends, who happens to be the vice president now, said at one of our Judiciary Committee hearings, is there anything we can force men to do that comes close to what we are forcing women and people who can bear children to do in this country? The person who testified could not think of anything. But I look at the men here. What if government were to tell you you all had to go get vasectomies? Think about it. And to force women to bear children. Not to have bodily autonomy from the moment of conception. That's where this country is heading, and that's why we need this law. I'm proud to introduce my colleague, Patty Murray, who has been at the forefront on abortion rights and our right to control our own bodies. Patty?
Well, thank you. And first, I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Markey, Duckworth, and Hirono, for introducing this legislation and for their partnership. As they have made clear, the Right to Contraception Act could not be more straightforward. Our bill is incredibly simple. It would protect every single American's fundamental right to birth control by enshrining that right into federal law. Nearly 60 years ago, in Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court affirmed Americans' right to privacy, and with it, their right to contraception. But that right, like so many of our fundamental rights, is now under threat from extreme Republican politicians. So our bill would simply codify Americans' right to birth control and protect this fundamental right from Republicans' nonstop attacks. It would prevent extreme politicians from interfering with your ability to get the birth control you need to plan a family on your own terms. Truth be told, it is downright a shame that our legislation and this press conference today is even necessary. We're talking about really basic and really fundamental right that was affirmed a half a century ago. Generations of Americans have counted on the right to contraception. For them, it is not political, and it shouldn't be political here in Congress either. But that's where Republicans are right now, because who would want to block legislation to protect such a basic right, a right that allows people to have control of their own future and start a family when they are ready to? Who would want to roll back a right to the American people overwhelmingly support? And I do mean overwhelmingly, because the vast majority of Democrats, the vast majority of Republicans, the vast majority of independents all agree politicians should have no place in determining whether or not you can access birth control. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't matter to Republicans how long a right has been affirmed or how much people support it, because they are now more than willing to reverse the clock. And we are living that painful reality when it comes to the right to abortion. Mark my words, Republicans will not stop at abortion. They are coming for birth control too. Just last month, as you heard, when overturning Roe v. Wade, Justice Thomas made clear in his concurring opinion that rights that generations of Americans have taken for granted are now on the chopping block, and that includes your right to marry who you love and to get the birth control you need. It is outrageous. And it's certainly not just Justice Thomas who's talking about this. In states across the country, extreme Republican lawmakers are talking about restricting access to birth control. Republicans in Idaho, Missouri, Louisiana, Arkansas, Michigan, and elsewhere are eyeing legislation that would outlaw Plan B and IUDs. And just last week, we all watched as 195 House Republicans voted against this bill. 195. Nearly the entire House Republican caucus does not want to protect your right to birth control. So let's be clear here. We have one of the most powerful judges in this country talking about overturning the right to contraception. We've got Republican state legislators working to restrict women's ability to get birth control of their choice. And we've got House Republicans showing their true colors right here in Congress. So this is not some far-off theoretical worry. This is real. And to anyone who might say, oh, this effort's a waste of time or that bill isn't needed, you are wrong. Republicans are coming for birth control and Democrats are fighting back. We will not sit quietly by as Republicans continue chipping away at our rights, as they make their intentions clear and then deflect and say we're overreacting. Enough of that. Enough of that. Americans have the right to use birth control, period. And Democrats are going to work to protect that right. So tomorrow, we're going to ask unanimous consent to pass the Right to Contraception Act on the Senate floor. And I really hope that our Republican colleagues get out of the way and let us protect that basic right instead of blocking progress yet again. Because this bill could not be more than common sense. It couldn't be more basic. Americans of all stripes and colors overwhelmingly support this right. And all Republicans have to do tomorrow is get out of the way. Tomorrow, Americans will be watching closely to see if they are willing to protect the freedom to use birth control, or if they block legislation to codify Americans' rights to birth control and keep chasing this extreme agenda to control women's bodies. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Blumenthal. Mr. Ernest.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Murray, for that really eloquent description about why we need this bill. There are a lot of people out there, I suspect, who are completely unaware that Griswold versus Connecticut, yes, it is Griswold versus Connecticut, now the law of the land, it has been the law of the land for decades, is under threat right now. And to my Republican colleagues or anyone else who's saying, oh, well, you're overreacting, not necessary, certainly let's wait. The United States Supreme Court is now run by a right-wing fringe majority that has the right to contraception on its hit list. That hit list also includes marriage equality. It includes other rights that are based on the right to privacy. That's what the Supreme Court said in Dobbs. In overturning Roe v. Wade, it said Roe was egregiously wrong. There is no right to privacy that protects all of these other rights. And so every one of them is now in danger. It's only a matter of time. And we need to send a message to the women and the men of America. The right to contraception is protected. Not by the Supreme Court, because we can't count on them anymore, but by the United States Congress. And that is so fundamentally important and necessary now that we are going to the floor tomorrow to seek unanimous consent, and shame on any Republican who objects. How disgraceful to object to the right to contraception guaranteed under our Constitution for decades, taken for granted by so many. Let me be clear, this issue shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be a matter of contention. It's a public health issue. It's a human rights issue. It is fundamentally what makes America great, that we have rights against governmental intrusion. The right to be let alone, and that's the right to privacy. So my Republican colleagues have said again and again and again, they're in favor of families, they're in favor of healthy birth. If they are in fact in favor of families, they can join us tomorrow in supporting the Right to Contraception Act. We need to give women in this country the certainty that they will continue to have the right to decide when and whether to have children. That is about families, it's about individual liberties, and I am really proud to stand with my colleagues in this effort. There is no place to hide from this issue. There is no moral hiding, because what we owe the women of America is the certainty and security that they can plan their lives and control their bodies. And I'm very proud to introduce Senator Klobuchar.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, everything's been said, but I haven't said it. Thank you, Dick, for your incredible leadership, and Ed for putting together this important bill. Maisie, my buddy on the Judiciary Committee, always standing tall. And then Patty Murray, the leader of the Health Committee, who's really been able to bring people together. All of us have different states, different parts of the country we represent, but on a real focused message after this horrific decision came out. And that is that this is a decision, women's health is a decision to be made with the woman and her family and her doctor, and not politicians. And if my number one point made by Senator Blumenthal just now is that if you think this couldn't happen, think again. Because Justice Thomas really put out a roadmap there for people to follow about the other rights that he thought didn't belong in our laws. And of course, those decisions, the privacy right, the right to privacy, all of those are central to contraception in the Griswold case. Second sign, I always look at signs, right? You got the roadmap. Then you got what's happening with the states. Well, what's happening with the states? You have a Mississippi governor who has refused to rule out banning contraception. Just last year, the Missouri state legislature tried to cut off public funding for widely used contraceptions like IUDs and Plan B. You've had comments from a number of legislators in states, multiple states, that this is where they are headed. And people are realizing it. Things that they just thought were there for them may not be there. As I noted the other day, a sheriff's deputy who manned a metal detector in my state once said to me, you know, I don't follow politics at all, but no one has taken my birth control pills away from me. So I think that this is something that the American people know could happen. And that's why it is so important for us to pass this protection into law, not only protection for abortion and reproductive services, but also the right to contraception. No one should be taking women's birth control away from them. And with that, I'll turn it back to Senator Markey.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And any questions?
Senator, you're saying you're going to try and use unanimous consent to pass this. Obviously, earlier this month, Democrats used a similar strategy to try and pass the right to travel to receive an abortion. It failed. Do you expect Republican objection to that unanimous consent attempt tomorrow? And what is the Democratic strategy if that does happen?
Well, obviously we hope no Republican will object. But if someone does, and I would expect that they would, then that's going to signal to our country that the Republicans intend on giving permission to the Supreme Court to repeal Griswold, to repeal the right to contraception in our country. And at that point, I think that it's going to contribute to a further effort across this country to make sure that it's injected into the election of 2022 all across our country. But it also won't stop us from trying to find a way of bringing out a direct vote onto the floor of the United States Senate so that every single Republican is put on record whether they support access to contraception or not. Question? Okay. Thank you all so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.